Okay. And, once again, thank you everyone for your patience. Thank you everyone for being here. My name is Marguerite Anglin, and I am the Public Art Director for the City of Philadelphia. And again, welcome to Public Art How to Start, our professional development series for emerging artists. We look forward to doing these workshops every quarter and making them as interesting and as inspirational and hopefully as informative as possible. And tonight is no different. This is our fifth workshop called Turning Passion into Profession. And I'm excited to be joined by our guest artist, Alvin Pettit, who is the winning artist that was selected to design Philadelphia's permanent Harriet Tubman statue. And I'll obviously be introducing Alvin a little bit later. But I'm really looking forward to our discussion and hearing Alvin share more about his many experiences in the public art world. This program is brought to you by OACCE, the city's Office of Arts, Culture, and the Creative Economy. We manage the city's Percent for Art program, which frequently announces public art competitions for city-funded capital construction projects throughout the city in recreation centers, libraries, parks, playgrounds, in so many different neighborhoods in Philadelphia. And we're also the stewards of Philadelphia's collection of over 1,000 works of public art consisting of indoor and outdoor sculptures, monuments, art walls, mosaics, bas-reliefs, and more. And those as well are located in every neighborhood of the city. OACCE developed the Public Art How to Start workshop series because we know it can be quite daunting as an artist to apply for large-scale public art projects in a major city like Philadelphia. And we really want to demystify the process. We really want to encourage more local and emerging artists to apply to compete for public art opportunities in Philadelphia. And we also know that artists of color especially are underrepresented among those who are creating public art in Philadelphia. And so our hope is by making these workshops available, that we'd be able to increase the capacity of our local and diverse artists, as well as all of our artists in Philadelphia, so that you can apply for public art opportunities in the city of Philadelphia and also beyond. And so those of you who've been tracking with us for the past 5 workshops in this series, you know that each workshop in this series presents a different topic, such as how to compete for a public art opportunity, how to create a winning design for a public art project, how to team up and collaborate with other artists to increase your capacity to win more work as a public artist. And so each of these workshops that we are providing feature different guest artists, sometimes one artist or multiple artists, a panel of artists who share their insights and lessons learned in their public art journey. And we also like to include just a quick brief overview of the city's Percent for Art program, as well as upcoming public art opportunities as well. And I'm actually going to be sharing an opportunity that would be coming up for if you're interested in applying to public art opportunity. We have a call for artists that's going to be launching this Friday. Hopefully by the end of this workshop, you have a better understanding of what it takes to maintain a public art career, and you'll also leave with some tools and tips for navigating a public art project or leveraging your experiences for greater success as a public artist. Noni, are we able to advance our slide? Awesome. So here are our goals for tonight. We want to provide you, whether you're an emerging artist or established artist, an opportunity to hear from Alvin, an experienced public artist who's going to be sharing examples of the defining moments in his public art journey and how they have shaped his career. We also want to provide tips for emerging artists who you may have a desire to enter into the public art profession, but you're not really sure if it's viable. How do people, navigate the realm and the world of public art? So we want to provide you with tips if you're looking to advance your career as an emerging artist, or if you have never done a public art project before. And then lastly, we want to provide artists with examples of really what it takes to be a successful public artist, what are some of the skills and experience that you'll need in order to advance your public art career. Next slide, please. So we will have a question and answer portion where we will invite you to ask questions by clicking the raise your hand feature so you can be unmuted. And as always, we ask that questions be brief and limited to the topic of this particular workshop so that everyone who wants to ask a question is able to do so. Okay, so we have a poll. Because we're thinking there may be a range of experience levels in the audience tonight. So I have a quick poll here. One question, 3 options that should come up on your screen that you can interact with that poll that's come up on your screen. If you can tell us, how would you define or describe where you are in your public art career? Are you exploring? You've never created public artwork before, but you're interested in learning more? Are you emerging? You may have created some public artwork, but you're still kind of at the beginning stages of your career. And then would you consider yourself established? You've experienced a measure of success. You know, you're working as a public artist, but you're still always looking to learn and grow. So we'll give about a minute for that to come up. Okay, I think there's a few people who haven't yet engaged. Make sure that you hit submit if you haven't yet. Okay, we got one more person that's just joined that. All right, so we're about about 52%. So I'm gonna end the poll now. Share results. So it looks like 52% would describe themselves as emerging, still kind of at the beginning stages, have done some public artwork, but looking to really find out how to leverage that and continue to do more work. And then we have 35%, which is the next largest group here, who is exploring, has never created public artwork before and interested to learn more. So, and then we have a group of those who are considered themselves established, which is great. And so we hope that by the end of the night, you will have, wherever you are in your career, you have learned something helpful to you, no matter what stage that you are at. I just saw a slide come up. And I'm going to stop the poll now, I believe. Okay. So before we get into tonight's conversation with Alvin, who is here, glad to see him. We were having a little bit of technical difficulties in the beginning with his camera, but glad to see him there. So right before we get to tonight's conversation, we just want to give you a brief overview of the City Percent for Art program, which is the primary way that the City of Philadelphia commissions public art. Because obviously you all are here looking for potential opportunities and ways to get involved. And so we just want to give you a quick overview. And as I mentioned at the end, we do have a call for artists through the Percent for Art program that will be opening on Friday. So you guys are kind of getting the first heads up on that. And so we often, the Office of the OACCE, the Office of Arts, Culture, and the Creative Economy, frequently announces public art competitions through the Percent for Art program. It's an open call for artists, and we're looking to attract a wide variety of original design ideas and creative expressions to become part of the city's public art collection. And the mission of the program is to provide beautiful and long-lasting artwork throughout the many public spaces of Philadelphia that reflect the diversity and the history of the city of Philadelphia and the people who live here. And so the city's collection of over 1,000 public artworks, as I mentioned, span from many different types of art mediums, as you can see here. Next slide, please. So with the City's Percent for Art program, city-funded construction projects trigger Percent for Art, which requires that 1% of the project budget for a city-funded capital construction project is designated to site-specific public art. All of the funding goes directly to the selected artists who may be emerging or established in their career, and that selected artist is responsible for the design, fabrication, and installation of the artwork with support from OACCE. Local artists and artists from BIPOC communities are strongly encouraged to apply. Selected artists are responsible for the design, fabrication, and installation of the artwork, as I mentioned, from support with support from OACCE. And community involvement is vital to the process to ensure that the artwork is telling the right stories that need to be told that reflect that that community where the artwork is being installed. And so, as I mentioned at the end, if you stay to the end, you'll be the first to hear of a call for artists that we'll be releasing on Friday through the Percent for Art program. Okay, so now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Alvin Pettit. Alvin
Hello, everybody.
Hey,
yes.
Alvin.
Hi, how are you, Marguerite? Can everybody see and hear me?
Yes. Alvin, I'm just gonna introduce you really quickly, and then we'll get into our discussion. And I'm just really looking forward to talking with you and learning a lot more about how you started and how you're navigating your public art career. But I'm just going to read your bio really quickly. So Alvin earned his BFA from the School of Visual Arts in New York City, where he landed his first professional job as assistant sculptor to the world-renowned artist Jeff Koons. He has since won numerous public and private public art commissions and has created artworks for clients such as NBC, the Guggenheim Museum, and Macy's Parade Studio. Alvin currently serves as the director of the Mary McLeod Bethune Life Center in Jersey City, where he also owns Alvin Pettit Studio. And in October 2023, Alvin was announced as the winning artist for Philadelphia's permanent Harriet Tubman statue, which will be installed, on the northeast apron of City Hall, and will also be the first statue of a Black historic female figure in the city of Philadelphia's public art collection. And I have had the pleasure of starting to get to know Alvin a little bit more as we're gearing up to really begin that project and move forward with it. And hi, Alvin. Glad to see you tonight.
Hi, everyone. Thank you to OACCE for providing me with this opportunity to speak to the public and hopefully engage and have some productive conversation here.
Yeah.
So,
Alvin, when we were thinking about like who should we feature to really talk about this conversation, turning passion to profession, you were top of our mind, and we really just think that you have so much to offer, and really looking forward to you sharing that with our guests tonight. So why don't we go to our next slide, which will all right. So Alvin, artists have a lot of options in how they craft their careers, but not every artist decides to take the path of creating art for the public realm. What are you most passionate about regarding public art, and what motivates you? Why do you do what you do as a public artist?
So there's many things that motivate me and that make me passionate about doing public art, but one of the points I can highlight off the top of the list is I feel that public art returns art to the people in a way that you might not necessarily find in galleries, private collections, museums. I mean, all of those venues you have to make a deliberate act and purposely go to enjoy the art. In some cases, you have to have the money to buy the art if you want to have it in your living room or in your private quarters or your backyard, wherever you might want to display it, but that's a money issue. So I think in a lot of, throughout the years, and I would say over the last half century, I feel that a lot of art has moved away from being kind of, I guess, relevant to the public. And it's become more of a niche interest amongst those that can afford to collect it and those that are on the art scene or in galleries and whatnot. And public art, I feel, is a great opportunity, especially with what's happening now recently with different minority groups and people that may have been left out of that conversation years ago when it came to public art are really, I feel now, finally getting dues that are long overdue. And that makes me passionate about it too, because also as an African American artist, I feel I can also uniquely contribute something from that perspective and that vision as well that has, I feel, often been left out of the conversation for many years, especially when I was growing up as a child. So yeah, that's what makes me passionate about it. And it's a contrast to what, when you look at the fine arts world and visual arts, which has been often isolated. And this is actually for people in an everyday setting. So it's almost kind of like when we do these public monuments, whether it's the Harriet Tubman or the many others that are around Philly, these become part of people's daily lives every day. They see it going to work. They see it they see these pieces taking their kids to school. You know, there's a people, you can now conversate about it. The art is coming to the people rather than the people have to go find the art. And that's very powerful. And I think that makes a difference because it makes art relevant to society again. That may not, when I say society, not just a small group of people, but to the general public, that the so-called art scene has failed to do, in my opinion. So that's what, if I'm answered the question correctly, that's what makes me passionate about it and why, I enjoy doing it so much and what I feel I'm not only getting out of it, but what I feel I'm giving back to the community by doing it. So.
That was just such a great answer. I can hear your passion as you're just talking about it. Is a great answer. And it really, we talk about putting the public back in public art, and then you're also being a role model as well to others.
And let me just add, I just want to cut you off. I'm sorry, let me just add too, when we think of what society values, what's important to us, what do we normally talk about when we're amongst friends and family? People talk about sports. They may talk about maybe music, entertainment, what movie you saw. But largely the visual arts is left out of that conversation. So it's almost become irrelevant to the general public of what you call, I guess they use the term politics, kitchen table issues, and I think when public art, especially public art that affects people and people remember and has an impact on people, now it becomes part of the normal general public conversation again. And it's about art. And that's not just a very powerful thing for the public, but it's also needed to, I think, in some ways, revitalize the art community and revitalize the art world. I mean, I think public art in some ways can give it an extra shot of boost of steroids that I feel it's needed because that is lost over the years.
Yeah, I love your answer, and it reminds me how important it is for people like you to be in this role as a public artist, understanding the importance of this, this power that public art has for communities, and understanding how it's not part of the everyday to see, a Black artist creating monumental sculptures, and it's not part of, even what we're talking about around the kitchen table per se, like you said. So it's really great to hear that. And, we'd love to hear more about what you do and how you got started as a public artist. So my second question is, can you tell us what were your first experiences that opened the door to your career in public art, and how did you even find those opportunities?
Well, mine, I think, is a very nuanced experience that led me to engage in public art within the last several years or so. And part of it also may come from just upbringing. I was brought up in a family that dealt heavily in the civil rights movement, with civil rights and activism in that sense. So that's always been with me. And then as me becoming an artist and a professional artist, I always felt like, okay, I also like to use my art to feel like I can make a difference or somehow affect change or change people's outlook on something. I mean, that's just my passion of how I like to use my art as a tool for not just social change. It can be emotional effect or whatever. And I think what kind of led me more into doing it more professionally actually may go back to I used to do, and this is not really public art, but it kind of still kind of introduced me to engage in art on a public, directly with the public. When I used to be a sculptor for Macy's, actually for the Thanksgiving Day parade years ago, and I would work on, it's more considered prop art, so to speak, but I would work on things for the floats and whatnot that you see in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade. And I was a sculptor at the Museum of Natural History for a while, sculpting the animals. This is going back over 20 years and stuff ago, sculpting animals and natural phenomenon and all that, whatnot. And so I got to see kind of firsthand how even when you would open up the exhibits and how people would come in and they would react to the art. Now in those particular cases, it's not like me as an artist is expressing any kind of individual opinion or voice in that type of artwork, but I still got to see that things that I created were affecting people. They were having fun looking at it. They were engaging in it. When the parade would come on, and we're going back to like 2008 or whatever at this point, and I would hear how people, oh, I saw what you sculpted on the float. I saw this and that, and people watching it. So it kind of opened my eyes just to the more like importance of, once again, like my first initial statement, in the general public just enjoying our crafts and what we do as artists, and how we can have a voice when we bring art to the people. And those were my early experiences with, I guess, the public that kind of made me then later on wanted to get involved in other more, I guess, specific projects, particularly like the Black Lives Matter mural that I did for Jersey City, as well as the Mary McLeod Bethune Monument, other murals that I've done that I think I've sent you some reference of that were out in public. And it's
Yeah,
also good.
why don't we go to the next slide,
Yeah.
where you can show us some of your early experiences.
Yeah, so what we see here are some examples of, these were some created for Canterbury Lake Park in New Hampshire. And basically they were for like a music or performance stage center that they had there, concert hall. And they wanted Michael Jackson, Louis Armstrong, Lady Gaga, and all these things went out in the public. And people just enjoyed them, interact with them. And like I said, it was initially probably considered a little bit more prop art because it's for an amusement park, but I kind of took it to another level and, made it more of kind of public art in that sense. And people really enjoyed it. And so those were like some of the early examples, as well as when I think maybe back 2012, 2013, you're looking at some murals that I did for Dunkin' Donuts and locally in Jersey City. So these were some of the early examples that I have here to show that kind of where I started breaking into public art more professionally. My background lies more in the 90s. I did editorial art for a lot of magazines, and then a lot of, I'd say Photoshop killed that industry a lot. So I moved over to sculpting, and that's where I moved into a lot of the initial kind of like display art and whatnot. And then within the last several years, started doing more specific pieces, maybe relating to civil rights or some sort of social justice issues.
Alvin, did you just kind of, how did you get from, I guess, designing maybe small scale sculptures, or did you go from like just creating in the gallery and then you just immediately scaled up?
No, one of my first jobs out of college, one of my first professional job out of college, I was actually hired on the spot working for an artist. Some of you may have heard of, a very famous artist named Jeff Koons. And I was hired to, he put me on the project of sculpting this giant balloon dog that you might have seen in some movies and stuff, not at the museums it was featured in. It's been all over, displayed all over the world and stuff in different museums and galleries. And that was my first art job. And that I think that was something like 10 or 11 feet high. So at that point, I just kind of, when it came to sculpting and then dealing with the Macy's floats and then dealing with the Museum of Natural History, all the projects were big. Now, I will say I also have a background in product design. I actually worked for a company back in the late 90s or whatnot, where I was doing like display figurines and whatnot, and actually designing them, these are like Christmas ornaments. Those were probably the most smaller ones that I did. And they would be sold in Walmart, Kmart, Sears. So that kind of gave me a little bit of good, uh, I guess, like experience in the commercial side of it. And when you're dealing with that, you're dealing with the public. How do you market to the public? How do you got to do things, your clients, whether it be Disney or Walmart in that sense, you got to know your client, know what they're looking for. So that gave me working for that and for the like 2 or 3 years, kind of gave me really good experience that I could also bring back to my fine arts as far as the marketing and the product development side of it. So, but I've always had a more of, I would say I've always had more of a, I like working big. I like the physicality of it. It's because it's almost, my original, when I first left Baltimore at high school, I attended Baltimore School of the Arts and moved to New York to go to college in 1988 at School of Visual Arts in Manhattan. And my original passion was to be a comic book artist. I wanted to work for Marvel and DC Comics. I wanted to draw superheroes. I'm a big comic book collector. I just had thousands of them. That's where I learned to draw from comics and everything. Batman, X-Men, Avengers, all that stuff. So that's what I thought I wanted to do. When I got to college, then I realized I don't want to sit at the drafting table for hours and hours on end. I just couldn't do it, drawing panel after panel after panel. I love to paint bigger. I love the physicality of it. I like to sweat when I work. So sculpting actually provided that, and also large scale paintings. I was probably one of the few in my class that actually went back and forth, of doing both painting and sculpture at that time. And so, yeah, I mean, that's what draws me to sculpture and what draws me actually to large scale work. I like and it just more, to me, it's more impactful in a way. I mean, certain things are good if you got them in a museum at home doing a small scale, but especially when you're doing things outside, you need to, it's out there to draw attention. So you have to kind of have it at a certain scale, just I feel, to get that impact visually.
That's such a great insight into how you got started. Thank you, Alvin. So our next question is, and we can move to that slide. You know, I think some artists are maybe more aware than others about the possibilities of a profession in public art. And, some artists like yourself just kind of make that leap to creating larger scale works of art. But some artists may not even know that that's possible, that they could scale up, or that is, even just seeing someone like you go into that career path. So was there a defining moment when you realized that creating public art was a possible career path for you?
I can't, in all honesty, I can't really say there was a defining moment. What I said along previously, it was almost like a gradual merge over the last, I'd say, 15 to 20 years, really. So when I started, I would say it probably, if I have to answer the question in a more definitive sort of way, I would say when, I guess, between 2015 and then when we saw certain kind of social uprisings, especially after what happened with the George Floyd killing and whatnot, and then obviously the riots happened, and then a lot of monuments were being torn down, and then the conversation of monuments really took over a lot of the landscape. And it, I mean, nobody condones, riot and violence or anything, but the conversation did happen, and I think it started to open up a lot of doors based on the conversations for minority subjects being depicted that were not previously depicted. And I think that's probably where I said, okay, well, this is an opportunity to really move on this a lot more strongly, to try to, share my vision and my voice about what I would like to see out there, because it becomes almost a little bit of a wild, wild west. Everybody kind of, when you open the doors, it's a good thing, but then you have everybody rushing. It's like a new gold rush, and that's always a good kind of environment, especially when it comes to the arts. And when I say gold rush, I mean it more, not necessarily money-wise, but just people wanting to get their ideas out there, people wanting to depict their visions, and artists coming that may not have had opportunities before to to get on to now be part of this landscape. And I think that happened within the last 4 years. And I definitely wanted to be a part of that because I had all this stuff in my head, or I want to do this, I want to do that. And it was the perfect time to do it. So even like the Mary McLeod Bethune Monument that I did for Jersey City, now that's a project, and I can get into that later because I was going to talk about just careers in the arts as far as not always waiting for somebody to email you or knock on your door or call you or whatever with a project, but actually spearheading projects as artists. Look around your landscape. What's missing? What do we not have out there? What do we want to see? And then trying to find the avenues and the roads and the pathways to make it happen. The Bethune sculpture is something I had kind of promoted and just kind of came up with the idea, and kind of I took it to the city of Jersey City, and luckily when funding came up for a park, I was able to persuade, getting the monument in there too. But it was a project that I pushed for at the time, and that's what we as artists have to do too, is also create projects that don't exist, because it is a local landscape. Sometimes people don't always know what, as far as needs to be there. So we as artists can always use our own vision and our own passions to make things happen.
Yeah, that's a great intro into our next question. And I think that you wanted to highlight that particular project. So that's a great segue. Because we'd love to hear more about some of your past work. And if you can share with us, what was your most successful public art commission, and why, and what were some of the lessons that you learned from it? And we can just move to the next slide with some of the images that you provided us about that project.
Well, on this one, I would say why I consider one of my most successful is just because the whole thing was a blank slate. Not only did I have the opportunity to create a monument in this sense, but I also had the opportunity to help design a park. And what you're looking at in the upper left-hand corner are my initial design, early on designs for the layout of the park. As far as I was involved in picking out the amenities that were going to be in the park. So it was just like a blank slate that I was able to actually use different skills and dabbling skills in architectural layouts and whatnot. And to me, it almost came natural because I always saw it as one big sculpture. So designing where the public would walk in on the monument, how they would walk around, putting a stage in there, the way the roads flow through the park was all created kind of around the monument so they can play off one another. And it's like, I didn't have a whole lot of architectural experience before, but like I said, for me, it was just one big sculpture project, whether it was doing the monument or actually designing the park. Art is art, for me. And so I really liked, and plus I guess being director of the center where it was at, would help a little bit because I was there also every day, helping to work with the contractors and monitoring how the details of the park and making sure that everything kind of came out to the specifications. And so that's it. Having a project with that scale, that's why I put it as one of the most successful, because there was so many aspects involved, and it gave me a lot of just experience on not just dealing directly with the art part I was more familiar with, but just dealing with all the contractors, and also goes into actually environmental design as well.
Alvin, you're talking about all the different things, components that went into this. You have the sculpture and you have, obviously this park that's created. Was there a design team that you work with that brought some of those, because I think a lot of times, and this is obviously a huge project, but even, smaller projects that are on the public scale, sometimes it's daunting to think about all the things that you maybe don't have capability or have skill in. But when you consider teaming or joining with, even if they're engineers or other people who are fabricators who provide additional skill sets. So did you work with others that contributed to your vision for this project?
Well, yes, on this particular project, I did work. I had like designers that were part of my staff and whatnot, graphic designers, as well as working directly with the city officials, the civil engineers, who were overseeing the construction of the park. So I work directly with them and the architects for the city. And that just kind of fell into place with, well, the Mary McLeod Bethune Life Center is also a city-owned and operated building, which makes me technically city too when I'm there. So I was just basically, at this point, working with Department of Public Works, who are all my kind of city counterparts. But, you know, it still gave me this experience of also navigating around municipalities very well and having to deal with the public aspect on that level and the government part of it. So yeah, that all that kind of came into play.
Yeah, no, this is great. I mean, were there any lessons that you learned that maybe you could share with our participants tonight, specifically on how you were able to make this successful?
Well, I would say the biggest lessons that I can share tonight, as far as once everything was technically in place, I would say this project ran very smoothly for the most part. I mean, basically the only holdup was me finishing up the monument after the park was finished. So where the plan was originally have everything kind of open at once, but the monument was taking a little bit longer than planned with the bronzing aspect and all that. So we did two openings, one for the park and one for the unveiling for the monument. But I would say the biggest thing I can give back as far as just going back to just taking initiatives and just making things happen and pushing for what your vision is just very important. I mean, there was a time where this project was close to getting probably scrapped and taken off the table. And so I actually organized the help of some community members and people that I knew to get petitions going around and with the community to make sure that it wasn't being, the narrative wasn't being distorted or put out there by somebody that didn't have the best interest in mind, because I thought that this was definitely in the neighborhood that it sits in, which is predominantly a kind of undeveloped in some ways of Black and brown community that needed something like this. And so I guess the main thing that I would take is, you know, don't worry about being aggressive or taking initiative to see what you want to happen. Sometimes you got to learn to fight for it. And that's one thing that I think sometimes as we as artists don't often like to do. Sometimes our nature can be that of being so reclusive because we work alone a lot and you have to be comfortable being alone, that we don't sometimes develop the skills to organize and to, I guess, initiate and fight for certain things that we want. Mm-hmm. So I would say to all those listening, you know, get to know your local officials, get to know people that can make things happen for you and happen for the community and help put your vision in the community. And that's very important, just going out, and it's more important than any resume. I'll put it like that. Yeah. Making those connections and developing a network of individuals that share your vision and you can work with to make things happen.
That's great advice. And this is such a beautiful work that you've created here. It's and one also, of my, I'm sorry.
I will say too, on this piece, you know, whenever I do a piece, I kind of really almost obsess over it. You know, it has its drawbacks and attributes, but I really did a lot of research and I looked at different monuments on Mary McLeod Bethune, and it's okay. I wanted something where it depicted her in her youth, almost that pure ambition when she was starting out. And you know, every monument I saw, she's pictured as an elderly woman. Nothing wrong with that, but I could tell that it was basically just taken from photographs that the artist had seen, and they just kind of put it into a monument. To me, I get a little bored with that. Working that way, I always like to create something probably that doesn't exist. So I really looked at different pictures, different outfits. I even consulted a costume designer to make sure the clothing was accurate, and I kind of created my own pose based on more of a mythology than any actual photo that I saw. And that's what I like to catch. Even what I'm doing with you all there in Philly, Same thing with Tubman. I kind of like to capture that whole mythological aspect of the character rather than just take it from a literal photograph. That would bore me, just take it from a photo. I don't like doing that. I use the photos as reference, and I obviously will catch her likeness and whatnot of the subject. But I like to create something that's more stunning that I couldn't find in the photograph. And I guess that's where that whole comic book background comes in, because in some ways I'm still a comic book artist, when it comes to showing those kind of heroic figures and taking those poses that I grew up learning to draw from.
Yeah, it's beautiful how you're able to capture the spirit of someone, but do it in a very original and creative way where it feels new and feels different, but it's that you see that person's essence coming forth. So that's really, it's a beautiful thing. I would really love with our next question, just if you can continue to show us a little bit more of your artworks. As an experienced public artist, there's probably a lot of things that you have learned from your past projects, especially the challenging ones. So, can you share with us what was your most challenging public art commission and why, and what lessons you learned from it? And you did share with us some in advance, some images. So we'll move to those images in the next slide.
So yeah, I would say this one was probably the most technically challenging in a way, in many ways, because of the scale that I had to execute it at. It's like maybe 2 or 3 blocks long. And I probably, like I said, I always like to try to do something little unique and different. So I once again looked at, this was in 2020, right after the whole George Floyd thing had happened. I looked at other Black Lives Matter. Every city was getting one, but I actually, some don't know, but my concept behind this was actually taken from a 1968, 69 Black Panther magazine. That's the heading. That's the way they used to title the head of their newspapers for the Panthers in the late 60s and early 70s, with the stars on each end, and then they had Huey P. Newton in one end, whatever like that. And so that's actually what this is taken from, along with the power fist. And then it's a lot of math, and I'm not good at math. So it's kind of like I'm using lasers. I'm working with a team that's assisting me on it. Got to make sure everybody's working to the same precision. And it has to, I know when this thing is done, somebody's gonna put a drone over it. And if it doesn't look right, or something is lopsided or off, that's the way it's gonna be seen. And I didn't want that. So getting the level of perfection from just the measurements, making sure it's a perfect rectangle, all that is very challenging when you're working on that scale. And then also adding the fix, and then putting portraits in. I put Kaepernick on one end, and I put Angela Davis on the other end. And it was almost kind of like what are they, maybe 50 years apart, but it's kind of also celebrating the Afro, from the power of the Afro and the hair, and the movement of the 1970s, and then moving on to the 2000s with Kaepernick. And both of them had these froze when you see it in its entirety. I felt it made a strong piece, because it made the coalition between hair, dress, and culture, along with also social movements. And we're talking almost a half a century apart, but they were both kind of relevant in their appearance and the way they wore the hair and what they stood for. And so that was a lot of putting in the philosophy behind it, as well as the technical aspect. And then also working with you're out there, and this is the beauty and the kind of the stress of the whole thing. You're working it in real time. So people are coming around. Some people coming around, can I help? How can I get involved? The next person may come around, it's like, why are we doing this? I don't believe in this, whatever. So I absorb all that. But you know what? I've always had, the way I've always felt, I take passionate rejection just as much as I love passionate compliments, because I feel I've done my job as an artist if I can provoke an emotion. And that's not just trying to do shock value, but when you create something that people can't ignore, and that people have to stop and look at, or it provokes some sort of strong reaction based on however they're seeing it through their paradigm, then you've done your job. I feel if I fail in a piece, because somebody can walk past it like wallpaper and not even notice it. They don't feel like I've accomplished anything. So I had to deal with all that in the Black Lives Matter. And then, whenever you're doing something with the city like that and something, you're also dealing with politics and all sort of things that go behind it. So, but you got to find a way when you're doing this to make all that fun for you and to really to get through it. To be honest with you, Margaret, I'm not really used to doing a lot of competitions. When it comes to competing for, I just recently started doing that in the last couple of years, and at first that wasn't very fun for me because, like I said, it wasn't something I was used to. Even with Philly, with the Tubman project, and a year before I was competing for another one. But I found a way to make it fun. Once I found a way to make it fun, it was almost kind of like, okay, however it turns out, it's still, competition can bring out the best in you, and it can also be exciting depending on how you want to look at it.
Yeah, I love how you talk about public art and saying that, and that is truly one of the roles of public art is to evoke emotion, right? And to really just evoke that emotion in people who are seeing it. And this mural being so powerful and, like you said, 2 to 3 blocks long, just the massive sheer extent of it. I'm sure just being on the ground and seeing the large fist and then, like you're saying, just the conversations that it helps facilitate, right? And so even as you're creating it, it's there and facilitating difficult conversations, which is another important role of public art. And so, and then down to, as you're talking about, just the lessons that you learned through that and working with, at such a large scale and working with, a big team and the bureaucratic, working at that level with city officials. You clearly learned a lot from that project.
And also, you learn too when you're doing either large scale paintings like this or large scale sculpture. You got to keep yourself conditioned because physically, because even when I was doing the Black Lives Matter project, I think I started off with maybe like it was over a 2 week span that we did this with help of my assistants. I think I started off with like 6 or 7 people or 8 people all together, and then maybe ended up with 2 because we're dealing with grueling sun. Actually, when we did this, I remember it was like July and August. I mean, the sun was kind of beating down on it. So it's almost kind of like you're wrapping your head up, and then it rains a lot, and so you're dealing with the weather, and just walking back and forth, carrying buckets of paint, doing. If you're not physically up to the task, a lot of people dropped out, and it really will test you when you're doing these large scales. Even when I'm doing sculptures, I'm running off of ladders and stuff like that. So, it keeps you also doing this large scale work. Reminds you got to stay conditioned too, just so your body can physically handle it.
No, I can imagine, and as we're talking, good segue into talking about, sculpture again. I mean, talking about, being on a ladder, making a big sculpture, you're going to be doing that here in Philadelphia. Obviously we're excited about you working with us as the Artist for Philadelphia's permanent Harriet Tubman statue. And so we'd love if you could share a little bit more about that project, also what anything else you're going to be working on next, and where you're heading in your career. What types of commissions are you going to be seeking in the future to help you to develop and grow as an artist? And so we'll share some of the images that you provided about one project, obviously, that we all know that you're going to be working on next, and that's Harriet Tubman.
Yes. So, I mean, I can't express how much I was excited to get this project. I mean, this is one of those things you just feel like, okay, this is one of the projects you feel like you were just born to do. For many aspects, the social context of it, as well as location, where it's going, and just to give whoever's listening maybe just kind of a brief, I guess, brief description of the concept. Basically, I wanted to show Harriet Tubman. I wanted to change the narrative from her just being always depicted as a slave in the woods or fleeing from the oppressor, I actually wanted to, as I've told you before, I've said before, depict a period of time when tyranny was on the run from her. Once again, these are things that I did not see growing up as a young African American uh, male in this country. And I guess one of the things that kind of always stuck with in my head back in 1985, I don't know if some of you maybe listen might remember. I remember they came up with this the series Shaka Zulu, and I didn't want to watch it. I didn't have any interest in watching. It's like a three-part miniseries. My father sits me down. He goes, "You're watching this. You're making. You're gonna watch this." I said, "I don't want to watch it." He didn't give me a choice. I had to sit there and watch it. And I said, "Why are you making me watch this?" And he's like, "Because you don't always need to see blacks depicted as slaves and butlers and nannies and stuff like that. You need to watch something where you actually see black folks in charge or in very dominant positions. You don't need to watch what you don't always need to see what they're making here in America." Now, that particular miniseries was made in Britain, and I pouted for the first like 20 minutes of the show, and then after that, I was hooked for like the next three series, and that has always kind of stuck with me when I work on my sculptures and what my father he making me, it was a one shot. I mean, there was a one small period of time, but it always kind of stuck with me with how we are depicted, even when we are shown, and we're often not, especially in movies that I grew up with in the 70s and 80s and 90s, either if not criminals or it's always from a subservient perspective. And that's why I kind of wanted to, with this monument and other things that I work on, change that narrative because, what's also passionate to me is that, young kids will walk past this and people coming home from commuting or going to work, and they'll see something that I didn't have a chance to see growing up. So for them, seeing monuments like this and others that are around will be normal. I also use a lot of different reference went into this. I spent most of my years growing up in Catholic school. I wasn't Catholic, but went to Catholic school in East Baltimore. And I would always see these sculptures around of St. Michael's. That was the name of the school, St. Michael's Elementary School. And it showed St. Michael as the archangel. And so I kind of use that reference as well, where the St. Michael is always stepping on the serpent with the spear into the serpent. And that's the statues that I end up seeing at the school all the time when we go to the church. So I kind of played off of that a little bit, as well as showing Tubman stepping on the flag, the Confederate flag, which in a sense was her serpent. So I kind of metaphorically used the sculptures of the St. Michael's, the archangel, and I kind of embedded in here, gave her the sword, the rifle, and all the kind of elaborate military gear as a soldier, but with almost an archangel concept guarding the palace, because Philly has one of the most beautiful, if not the most beautiful, please try again. The most beautiful city halls that I've seen in this country. So I really want to play off that palace aspect and show her almost like a guardian of this temple, so to speak, metaphorically. So that, and of course the other concept that I use, I combined the George Washington painting that I saw having to run across the flea market, and I like that praying pose. That's, as artists we get stuff in our head, and then we can come across something that just that's what I've been waiting for. And I was walking around a flea market, like when I'm thinking of an idea, it just stays with me all the time till it just starts evolving. And I happen to see this picture of this painting, a famous painting called the Prayer Valley Forge, that showed George Washington kneeling in the forest by his horse with this sword in a very gallant kneeling position. I was like, okay, that's my Tubman. I want to play off of that. Here we have the founding father, who was also a former slave owner. So now I'm going to reimagine that pose in that position in Harriet Tubman, who was a former slave and also, in a sense, was the founding mother of freedom, where he was the founding father of the country. So I like those two playing off of the other. And as the criteria that you all gave me is that it had to relate to Philadelphia, but you didn't necessarily tell me how it had to relate to Philadelphia. So I just kind of went with the approach of the theme that's already around there as far as soldiers, as well as connecting it even to Valley Forge, which is right outside the city of Philadelphia, and with Washington and the Post. I think it makes a good visual connection to City Hall and the history of Philly.
Yeah, we are so excited for this statue, and so many of us here in Philadelphia are excited about this statue coming, um, hopefully to be completed by next year, and excited to be working with you on it. And just your design for this sculpture is such a powerful expression of who Harriet Tubman was, and as you said, not just a slave running from from others, but she turned back around, after she was freed and became such a force, to the effect that she was leading military, um, you know, uh, um, what am I trying to say? Leading
Italian.
maneuvers, and as a woman, as a Black woman, during that time. And so to have that depicted here in Philadelphia and such an original a vision of Harriet Tubman is just very exciting. So thank you for sharing more about that. And I think you have another slide here of something else you're going to be working on.
Oh yeah, yeah. So this is a project that I'm currently negotiating right now with the city of Hoboken, New Jersey, and as a matter of fact, I'm meeting with them tomorrow to look at the site. The plan is to do a monument that kind of highlights heroes of the LGBT community, and they wanted to create a monument of Marsha P. Johnson, who was an activist for that cause back in the 70s, 80s, and was found was lost a life or whatever in the 90s. So once again, when this project was presented to me, I became very excited because this one is, I think the concept is very unique. It's just the subject, there's not a whole lot of monuments or tributes paid to heroes of the LGBT community. That's often a fight that's left out of when you talk about civil rights. Marsha P. Johnson was also an African-American trans woman, I guess you would call by today's standards. Well, not, I guess she wore the drag or whatever, but didn't use trans, I think, back then. So terminologies have changed a little bit. But, it gave an opportunity it was going to give an opportunity to also to give attention to other voices that are not heard. It's part of, like I said, part of being the LGBT community and also being African American. So it also relates to Black history as well as the history of rights for the gay and lesbian community. So once again, when I get every project, I don't necessarily get excited about taking. This stuff I actually turn down. It's like, I'm not interested. So for me to get through it, I usually have to have some level of interest or whatnot. So I kind of, this is one of the ones that I look forward to taking and executing in an interesting way that makes people want to learn more about the individual. And I'm also working with a project right now as we're still trying to get some funding and whatnot together, but for the mountains in North Carolina, the Appalachian mountains up in the Smokies, that was presented to me kind of like creating something that talks about the African Americans that came out of that region, which actually I'm connected to. One of the reasons they sought me out for this, because my great grandparents are from the mountains up there in the Smoky Mountains. So my father's side of the family kind of comes from that area. So I would go up there as a little kid and play up in the hills and all that stuff. And there's a whole documentary and movement coming out about that right now. So luckily we'll get that project underway as well.
Oh, great. Alvin, thanks for giving us, such a great insights, so many insights into your journey as a public artist. We look forward to those projects that you're working on, and seeing you continue to create powerful and meaningful public art. And so, this is actually our last question before we open it up for Q&A. You've been giving nuggets and tips all throughout, but what other advice or tips do you have for artists who want to turn their passion for public art into a profession?
Okay, I wrote down a list for this. So Uh,
Ready, go ahead.
won't be too long. Okay, so one, first and foremost, remember at the end of the day, we're entrepreneurs for the most part. I mean, you can go into certain professions that are staff related, but for the most part, a lot of artists are going to be just creating their own business in some sort of a way. So really focus on the business of it. I mean, unfortunately, I've always had a pet peeve with art schools because they don't teach us that. I mean, I went to the Baltimore School for the Arts for 4 years, went to School of Visual Arts and had some of the best technical art educations I could get. But as far as learning actually how to make a living of it, it was just kind of left out of the conversation. And to some degree wasn't even promoted or wanted or wasn't even encouraged to talk about. There's almost like this kind of unspoken sort of dynamic that talking about money and art will somehow taint your creative process, or they're not supposed to be talked about in the same, creativity is not supposed to be talked about in the same sentence as financial concerns. And I think that's leads to why a lot of us don't stay in the field or ends up leaving or doing something else. This is not that art doesn't make money, but artists don't because we're not given the tools to do that. And so focus on it as a business, really treat it like a business. Remember at the end of the day, it's something else they won't tell you in art school, but it's something I've always told my students. I don't care how beautiful your artwork is, you're painting a sculpture or whatever it might be. Remember at the end of the day, you're still creating a product. It's a product. You have to sell it like a product. You have to know who your clientele is, who you're selling it to, know your market, and treat it as such. Whether it comes to deadlines or whatever, you gotta make sure that all that is always thought about. And that doesn't mean they're not competing philosophies. You can do something that's the most creative thing in the world, but you also still should see it as a product that you're selling, or even if you're not doing public art, if you're doing something in a gallery or whatever, if that's your venue, okay, you still have a particular buyer. Whoever's buying figurative work is not necessarily buying landscapes. Who's your market? And target your marketing to your audience. Let's see, next, I would say, as I said before, I'll reiterate, engage with the public. You know, a lot of times I would experience when I would teach art class, sometimes reclusiveness and what's the word I'm looking for? Introvert behavior tends to be sometimes part of our nature. And that's fine because being introverted is what kind of can keep you in that studio working alone for days on end. But it can be a detriment when it's not allowing you to go out and network and to meet the people that you need to meet in order to make things happen that you want to do for yourself and getting your vision out there. So you have to, even if it's forcing yourself to move over, just stop in the studio. Like the way I work sometimes, I'll make a day or two where I'm just going to stop working. I'm not doing anything. I'm going to go switch to the left hemisphere of my brain, and I got to answer emails. I got to do, where do I send out W-9 forms? Do I have to do all that? And I just try to make a point to section out so much time, at least every other day, to make sure I'm catching up on all that stuff. You know, that's kind of the bad medicine. It's the reality of, running a business. I would say, now this is something, I sit on the Jersey City Arts Council as well. And one thing that I've always pushed as far as is passionate to me is that artists also need to get politically involved and socially involved in their communities. I mean, we always look at politics as a bad word, but it's going to affect you one way or the other. So we as an arts community, we don't necessarily hold local officials accountable to our interests. So when you look at programs that get cut or grant monies that don't see the light of day for artists because we're not a voting constituency that keeps people in office, like plumbers unions and police unions and whoever else that local officials have to answer to. We as artists need to have the same impact, because it may not be affect you immediately one-on-one in that sense, but overall, like I said, when you can help develop an arts community in the neighborhood or town or city that you live in or state, then it all kind of comes back to help everybody who's part of the arts, as well as the economic attributes that it brings to your cities itself. So all that needs to be, we need to flex our our powers and our political muscles in the arts community as well too. So I always try to stay involved in that aspect. Also, I would tell artists, work on your writing and your presentation skills. Yeah, I mean, don't become so reclusive that you can't finish a sentence if somebody asks you why they should pull out their wallet and buy your work. You know, you got to be able to explain yourself. You got to be able to present yourself. You got to be able to sell yourself. And if you can't talk to people, if you give them a funny, weird look, you know, when they ask you about your artwork, then they're probably just going to walk away when you could have just made a sale. Now, if you're fortunate to have a spouse or a partner or a business partner that can handle that for you, by all means. But I still believe that you, as artists, you, even if you have help and you have competent help that can help you sell and market, in some ways you're your best promoter. And I think that artists just need to just develop skills when it comes to presenting, writing, speaking. I mean, look how much I had to write for, how many times for the Philadelphia contest. I mean, you know, you guys definitely put us, you did your vetting. We went through the ringer with just all the promotions that we had to do, the writing, the meetings that we had, which is a good thing because it got the public involved, but it's a lot of work. So once again, I tell artists, get those skills together. Like I already said, create opportunities for yourself. Don't just wait for things to happen. See what needs to be done and be proactive in making it happen. I mean, your ideas as artists, they're just as good, if not better, than sometimes than anybody else who comes up with an idea and calls you about it. So don't be worried about being the first to present it and trying to find the venues and the pathways to make it happen. I already said market and promote yourself. Always, you got to do that on a constant basis. Get your website together. Use your social media. It's free. We got tools now that I didn't even have back in college or whatnot. So there's really no excuse for, you know, not getting your voice out there. And I already said, choose, if you're going to go to art school or do follow that path, if you feel you need that first, by all means go, but make sure that you're choosing an art school that's going to focus on the business, not just one little class that may mention a few things, but can really give you the hard skills to really make your passion a reality. I'm almost finished here. Also, what are you going to create that stands out? As sculptors or whatever, we don't have to even compete with each other anymore. We have to also compete with 3D printers and technologies that weren't around even 10 or 15 years ago. So what are you doing that makes your work look unique? What are you doing that gives yours a voice that people know your signature even before you sign it? So think about what that might be and kind of make sure it has a certain continuity, a consistency to it that can actually, people can know what your brand is. It's all about branding and making your symbol and your vision have a unique look. Make good art. I mean, you know, you got to be good at what you do. I've never been one of these people that says, okay, all art is good and art is in the eye of the beholder. I don't believe that. If somebody can't sing and they can't dance, they get booed off the Apollo. So, I mean, why do we say with art, okay, it's all good? No, it's not. Now, that doesn't mean whether it's abstract or whether it's figurative or whatever style it's in. There's certain things when we talk about form and balance and emotion, how it communicates, how does it make you feel? If it can make you feel a certain way, then it's done its job. It doesn't have to be the best anatomically correct, but if it can, it's like, which better, blues or classical music? They both spoke to their audience, and blues is a lot less technical, but if it spoke to people, or like hip hop, if it speaks to people, it's great music and it's done its job. Same with art. Also, yeah, just remember, especially when doing these monuments, we're creating art first. I think sometimes with public monuments, and I meant to say this at first, it's often left out of the whole arts movement in some ways. When you talk about the fine arts, things that are selling in Sotheby's or Christie's auction house or selling in high-priced galleries, that fine arts world has never really acknowledged public art in the same way. So I think hopefully a lot of that can change, because public art has almost been seen as some sort of just kind of like tool art or whatever, just to do a portrait of somebody. Like when you look at, I said at a conference last night, as a matter of fact, most of us don't know who the artist was that sculpted Mount Rushmore. He slips my mind in a way. I'm trying to think of one of the most famous sculptors in the world, one of the most famous monuments in this country. But everybody knows Michelangelo's David. I mean, one is more like strictly about portraiture. So, you know, the president's heads looks right, but So in some ways, when we see monuments of Lincoln or Jefferson, whoever it might be, most of the time we don't care about the artist. Just, does it look like Lincoln? Good, job done. The pigeons rest on it. We'll have our picnic in the park. Nobody really looks at it. But when you look at Michelangelo's David, the reason why the word Michelangelo always comes first, because it's an interpretation of something that none of us have a picture to. Nobody knows what David looked like, because it's a religious figure. So it opens up to his visions of what he wants to interpret it as. And I think that's a good thing. As a matter of fact, one of the good things that I love about this Harriet Tubman project, I like the fact that there's so few pictures that exist of Harriet Tubman. It's just enough there for me to see how she looked and to put together her facial structure and whatnot and what she might have wore. But there's maybe about 5 or 6 pictures that exist of her. But the beauty of that is that now that's allowed me as an artist to kind of fill in so many blanks of what probably could have happened, or even on the battlefield where we talked about where it's inspired from, or and it leaves me so much more freedom, as opposed to doing somebody like I did Michael Jackson, where you've got millions of pictures that exist of the guy, so you just pick a pose. So I like that aspect because it allows me as an artist to bring so much of my own vision into something.
So Alvin, I'm gonna stop you there, because
Okay.
you're giving so much great information. We might have to do a part 2, but I really want to allow people the opportunity to ask their questions. We only have about maybe 12 minutes left, and we want to let people ask some questions. And maybe if you got some of those tips, you can kind of like dovetail them into those responses. But at this time, I just want to thank Alvin for everything that he shared so far. And he's obviously such a wealth of information and advice, and just his experiences that he offers in public art has been amazing to hear you share about it, everything that you've been working on, and everything that you have to offer. So I want to pause and open the floor to questions from our audience. And our next slide here, I don't know if it's on our next slide, but I'll just say, please use the raise your hand feature located at the bottom menu of your Zoom window. And when you're called on, you'll be asked to unmute yourself to ask your question. And I know we've got a number of people in the audience here tonight, so just ensure as many questions get asked as possible. If you can keep your questions brief and focus on tonight's topic, that'd be great. So I see already a couple hands. Yeah, and I'm going to ask Noni Clemens to help us with Q&A.
Yes, so we have a question from Vanessa. You can unmute yourself and ask your question.
All right. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Have I unmuted myself?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, awesome. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much to the OACCE office for hosting, and thank you, Alvin, for sharing your story in public art. It's been really fascinating to hear more about your approach and your career path. And you kind of started talking a little bit about some of those conversations that you would have with community members as you're installing some of the public work that you do, like the Black Lives Matter mural. So I was just curious to hear more about your community engagement experience when you're still in like the earlier stages of the design process, and how do you balance feedback from community members with your own visions for the project, especially if maybe your vision differs from what the community is looking for. Yeah, I'm just curious to hear if you've had any experience with that, and how you navigate that.
Yeah, so that is always a very, fine balance. I guess also me managing a community center every day gives me probably a unique perspective to hear people just talking about what is important to community and whatnot. But when you're dealing with art, for me, and this best, maybe another artist will give you a different answer, but for me, it's almost a balance of knowing what you think the community wants, what they would want to see. But sometimes you can't, as artists, you can't always assume that they know what they want to see. It's almost kind of like you have to balance that out with the whole philosophy of also building and they'll come. You know, you got to do what you got to trust that whatever you're feeling passionate about. I'm sorry, there's a horn back here. I hope I'm not. I hope you can still hear me. A freight train coming by. But whatever you're passionate about, that you got to feel confident that somebody else out there will be passionate about the same thing, and other people will recognize your vision. And you got to do it in a way that makes sure you're communicating to people visually. So you have to stand back, take a nap or come back to something next day and look at it with fresh eyes and say, okay, or maybe get people just to, if you're doing something in your studio, whatever, get a second eye on something, get an opinion. That doesn't mean you have to take it, but you get a little feedback on what people might want to hear. And like I said, keep your own in there. At first, make sure you're following your passion, and then communicate in a way that you want to present it to the public so they understand it. And like writing a good song or writing a good book, you can have the great idea in your head, but if you can't communicate it properly, great ideas can get lost because just poor communication. Same with art.
That's a great answer. Thank you, Alvin, and thank you, Vanessa, for that question. I saw a couple other hands up. I want to make sure we get to everyone.
We have a question next from, it's either Varvara or Varvera. You can now unmute yourself and ask your question.
It's Varvara. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Awesome. Yeah, first, also thank you so much for this great opportunity to listen to your story and to find out so much information from you. It's very much appreciated. I have 3 questions. I don't know whether I should pick just one or I should try to ask all of them, but do it briefly and quickly.
Well,
sorry, if you could just ask one question,
okay,
to start, and then if we have, we're able to, we'll circle back to you after everyone else is gone.
Okay, no problem. Thank you. So my main question is how to mostly like get started with doing public art, because I'm an MFA student and I'm a sculptor, and I've been interested in applying for public art. But first thing I heard is that most of public art projects, they are not looking for hiring students for these opportunities. And second thing that I keep hearing from other people that have been doing public art is that previous experience with public art is super important. And how to get started if you don't have any previous experience with making public art sculptures or like any other artworks. So what would be a good way to like squeeze in and start doing it?
So, I mean, there's so many ways that I can answer that, and there's so many answers to that question. I'm going to give you, first of all, I would say nobody has to necessarily know you're a student but you. I mean, you don't have to necessarily put that out there. If you got good art and you got a good product and you're presenting it well to those that can help you execute it and get it done and get it out there in the public, that's 90% of it is right there. So I wouldn't get so caught up in, your own head about being a student or let that hurt your confidence. And I would say there's different venues. I mean, here's an example. I have a good friend of mine who he just creates these monuments on his own in his studio. And then they're almost like kind of like gag sort of satirical art. Like he'll take a subject matter, like a New York folklore tale, and then do a sculpture of it, like as if it were real or something like that, or like a real story, like UFOs attacked Brooklyn Bridge or something like that, whatever it might be. And he'll do these monuments, these little like fictional monuments, and then he'll build his own pedestals and go out there and put them on just display out in different parts and different sections of New York. And the publics actually think they're real, and he's gotten actually news press and recognition off of just doing that. And that's one way to kind of just start building a portfolio. I mean, that's a little, I guess, out of the norm, but my point is that's one avenue. You can also look for grants, look for different projects that might be coming up, get on certain emailing lists, like Marguerite was telling you today, whatever city of Philadelphia is doing. And like I said, if you present it well, then you got a good chance of getting in there. Maybe not some of the bigger ones, but at least you get a few small ones under your belt. Start making sure you keep your portfolio together, making sure you're keeping it on social media, and you have your website so that you can, if you got 2 or 3, then people at least know you can execute it. You come through with your product, and you should be able to take it from there. So yeah, look at all kind of creative ways to get. There's all kind of. I just gave you a few because we're short on time, but hopefully I was able to help you out a little bit.
Thank you, Alvin. And Vivara, I would also add that if you find any opportunities to be mentored or work as an apprentice with any artists that you may know of, or talking with your professors as well, who might also in their peers or in their practices might need apprentices as well. That's another way to kind of get that experience, and then you can also put that on your resume. Okay, and I think we have another question.
Yeah, we have one more question from Tim, who has their hand raised. You should now be able to unmute yourself.
Great, can you hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. Alvin, thank you so much for this. I was wondering how you start to think logistically, conceptually, or technically about working at the scale of public art. Like most of what I do is very, it can fit on a table, but how you start thinking about actually producing works at the scale of living outside and living with people publicly.
Well, one of the things that I always do, I usually try to pay close attention to the site or wherever it's going to be. Like even when we were in the competing stage for the Tubman project, I drove down to Philly a couple times, like on a Sunday, just when no people are out there, and just kind of just walked around the site, got some coffee, just sat there and just stared at it. And, that's how I kind of develop my concepts. But there's so many. What was the second part of your question, Tim? What? Tim?
Hold on, Tim, can you raise your hand again?
Okay. All right. But anyway, I think, basically.
Here's Tim.
Tim?
Yeah, Tim.
Yes. Hello. Does that work?
Give me the second part of your question right quick again. Just
yes. So like logistically, conceptually, and like technically working to that scale. So kind of like site specific, but then also like actual active creating these large things.
Yeah. So going to the site, seeing the scale that would fit good in that, would fit well in the specific site. Go there, visit your site. Sometimes you can't really see it online on Google Maps. It doesn't really pay it justice. You got to kind of be there. Also, for me, I actually like to. I do detail maquettes depending on when I have to do that, the level of details. But for me, some artists blow their things up digitally or whatever, because you can do that now. I don't work that way because what may look good in a 2-foot model is not going to necessarily look good at 11 to 14 feet high. So I always start from scratch, and there's always, for me, it's a new journey every time I do it. If I'm doing it a second time from the maquette, I try to make it better. There's things I can improve from the maquette, and there's things I'll have to change because now we're going to be looking up at it as opposed to looking down when it's 2 feet. So all of that kind of goes into my thinking when I'm putting something out there. I kind of put myself, try to get out of artist shoes and think about if I were just a regular pedestrian passing by, how would I look at this? How would I walk around it? What would catch me on it? And that's my process, just trying to step out of my own shoes and put myself in the shoes of the viewer to kind of get a sense on how I want to communicate to the public.
Thank you, Alvin. I think we have 2 more questions, and I think those are going to be the last 2 questions.
Sure. We have a question from Carrie.
Hi, Alvin. Thanks. This is great.
Thank you.
Public art is often outdoors, and it's also accessible to the public, which means they'll often touch it, climb it, sit on it. So what are some steps or experience you do to make your art more durable and safe and lasting, given that it's going to have these kind of encounters with weather and the actual public?
Yeah, good question. Well, you're always thinking also in the sculpting stage, okay, I don't want anything that some kid is going to get impaled on. That's not going to go well. So, I want things that are sharp, or things that are maybe sticking out, you maybe want to avoid. Also things that may get bumped or hit by machine, could be going by cleaning the pavement or something, and bump it and knock it out. You want to avoid that. So yeah, you're always thinking about that aspect of it while you're actually creating it. Also about the balance of it, just for durability. Like when we look at when Marguerite showed you examples of the Harriet Tubman statue, being as though she's going to be standing on her feet. Feet and ankles can be potentially a weak point, even in bronze, because it's still holding up a lot of weight. So the amount of chains that I had, the chain mountain that I have her kneeling on, it's there for part of the concept, but it's also not. It's there for the aesthetics of the piece. but it's also there as a support of the piece because it's going to flow into the foot, which actually is going to give that foot more durability and more of a triangle kind of pyramid shape to kind of support the whole weight of the sculpture. So when you're doing these, especially large scales, you have to kind of teach yourself the basics of, I guess, structural engineering. You don't have to be a structural engineer, but a sculptor, when you, especially doing figurative work at large scale, does need to know basic sculptural engineering and balance and all that, just to make the piece safe and for its also the longevity of the piece.
Thank you. Great answer, Alvin. And I think we had one more. We used to have one more hand up. Do we still have that hand, Noni?
We don't have any more hands raised. They must have lowered their hand.
Okay. If there are no more questions, I think we have one more slide here where we promised we would show an upcoming public art opportunity, as I mentioned earlier. So we have a call for artists that will be opening on Friday, March 29th. It's for the Barrett Playground Present for Art project. And we are seeking one artist or one artist team to create 2 complementary artworks consisting of a sculptural ceiling hung installation and an indoor art wall. And that's two artworks for that one project. And so we are encouraging artist teams, local artists, and artists from BIPOC communities are strongly encouraged to apply. We want any and everyone to apply, but we want people to know that they are encouraged to apply who may not, otherwise apply. So this call opens Friday. We will have an artist informational meeting on April the 15th just to walk through the application process and answer any questions about the opportunity. And then your qualifications would be due on May 27th. And so if you would like more information, please go to creativephl.org. That call will be listed as open on Friday. And also you can sign up to receive a notification for a call for artists or any other information with regard to our office and other opportunities that we have by also going to creativephl.org and signing up to be a part of our mailing list. And so with that, I want to just say thank you. Thank you everyone for joining us. We went a few minutes over. I want to say thank you to Alvin for sharing such a wealth of experience with us. I kind of feel like we're going to need a part 2 because there's so many other things that we just kind of touched the tip of the iceberg on. There's so many things that we could talk about in this realm of public art and with all of the experience that you have. But yeah, thank you so much, Alvin, and thank you for all of you for being with us tonight. Again, check our website at creativephl.org. And you can receive information by signing up on our mailing list for our next quarterly workshop in the Public Art How to Start series. And so with that, I'll say thank you and have a good night.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.